DC Comics and Marvel Comics are having a hard time really getting traction with some of their female-led and minority-led superhero comics. And I think there's a couple of reasons that kind of play into this. And I thought it was an interesting look. Once again, I'm using the breakdowns from Comic Book Revolution. I guess some people have said that I'm presenting this data as if it's something we've never seen before. No, these numbers are based off Comics Hub. There's the only direct market sales data that we really have. What's interesting about what Comic Book Revolution does is they break the sales down by tier, like you'll see top 10 sales, top 25, top 50, top 75, top 100, stuff like that. But then they break it down into problem sets, similar to what I do when I go over the comic book solicitations, and I talk about the amount of Batman, Spider-Man books that Marvel and DC are producing and how much they cost on average per issue. And I personally really like that. It's very helpful to look at some of the issues going on with comic books, and it helps you to get a more coherent look at what's going on once you start removing the things that you don't need to see when you're looking at a particular problem set. In this case, female and minority-led superhero comics from Marvel and DC Comics, which aren't doing all that well. So let's go into it. Let's look at some of these numbers and let's look at some of the common denominators that we'll see throughout these titles. We'll look at the female-led superheroes first, and I will say up front, She-Hulk is the best-selling female-led superhero comic, obviously from Marvel. They did not ship that series in May of 2022, so She-Hulk would normally top this list, but that isn't there. So it looks a little bit worse than it truly is, but these numbers are very not good. We only have 7 comic books in the top 100. The only reason the red arrows are there, so you can see where the comic book title and the writer are lining up. But the blue boxes around some of the titles specifically identify female superheroes that are holding on to the mantle of another character where they took it from somebody else. Obviously, Silk is a female Korean version of Spider-Man. Batgirls features Stephanie Brown and Cassandra Cain as Batgirls rather than Barbara Gordon, the original Batgirl. Captain Carter obviously is a knockoff of Captain America. Nubia Coronation Special. Obviously, Nubia is now the Queen of the Amazons rather than Hippolyta. So those are the titles with heroes borrowing mantles from previously established heroes, whether it be male or female. And when you look at the names associated with the titles, you'll see there are very few opportunities for male comic book writers from Marvel or DC to write female-led comic book series. I think that's a problem because the overwhelming majority of comic book writers right now for Marvel and DC are male. Certainly the best-selling ones tend to be male superhero writers. So Marvel and DC appear to be going out of their way to limit the opportunities for these characters to really blow up and sell better, because it appears for the most part they don't want to put male writers on these heroes. The only exceptions are Jamie McKelvey on Captain Carter, and then we have Brian Michael Bendis on Naomi. Obviously, he created that character for DC Comics. Whereas you look at the independent comics led by females, you will see some male writers in there. Christopher Priest, obviously a legend in the comic book industry, is writing Vampirella. Joe Benitez is writing the Lady Mechanica series. And then we have Dan Abnett writing Immortal Red Sonja. We do have a few male co-writers. Obviously, there's a few male writers with Kevin Eastman, Freddie Williams II, Matthew Rosenberg on the Elektra Black, White, and Blood anthology. Clunrad is Becky Cloonan and Michael Conrad. He is a co-writer there. But for the most part, they want females writing their female superheroes. And I can't understand the logic that goes into that. I guess if you had a really thriving line and you had just a shitload of really good female comic book writers working for DC and Marvel at the moment that were really hot, it would kind of make sense. Although I don't think they would like to be pigeonholed on all these lower selling characters. But you're never going to get really top sales on any of these characters until you put some of their hot writers on there and really show the audience that they are important to Marvel and DC Comics. Does anyone think that Silk is important because they have Emily Kim on there? I don't think most people know who that is. Everyone knows that Nubia Coronation Special isn't important because it has Vita Ayala and Stephanie Williams, 2 comic book writers that are known to not sell. And when their names are associated with a comic book, you would assume that it isn't all that important. Unfortunately, obviously, they can rehab their reputations, and perhaps they will be bigger deals in the comic book industry over time. But today, in the here and now, that's just not the case. But a lot of these choices, if they were working, I would understand them. If they weren't just tanking sales left and right. But we've had a long enough lifespan of these ideas where the gender of the writer tends to match the gender of the hero in a comic book from Marvel or DC, as long as it's female. If it's a male hero, it doesn't seem to matter as much. And Marvel and DC are really sentencing these heroes that could be big sellers to the wasteland. You know, a lot of these things are never going to pick up traction. They're not going to sell well in trades and whatnot because the audience just isn't built in there. And a lot of these comic book writers on these series aren't really superhero comic book writers, so they don't really fit in with the genre. We see something very similar when we see minority-led superheroes. And I do want to say, I don't understand why Spawn is not on this list. They included independent titles in the top female-led titles list, but they don't appear to do that here in the top minority-led titles because Spawn would make a big difference. You've got Spawn, you got King Spawn. Both of those are in the top 30, and they would be among the best-selling titles. And here, these numbers are a little bit exaggerated because we do have 3 #1 issues sitting up at the top. But even in that case, Spider-Man 2099 Exodus, being this big anniversary celebration, sitting in at number 35 on the first issue is actually pretty bad. And a lot of these minority characters, as you can see, that are leading these titles are being hamstrung and weighed down by holding the mantle of a character that's already established. We see it obviously up there with Captain America. We see it with several Spider-Man comic books. Nubia Coronation Special we already talked about. Obviously, they decided to remove that title from Danny Rand and give it to Swordmaster, I Am Batman, the Black Batman series. And then all the way at the bottom, we can see the Jackson Hyde-led Aquaman series. DC and Marvel really need to get it through their heads that these mantle swaps are not working. They do not get the new character over. They need to have their own unique superhero identities if you want people to buy into them. Otherwise, they just feel like a cheap knockoff or some type of publicity grab for the character rather than being fully fleshed out characters that people want to invest in. And here you can see that Marvel and DC are very interested in keeping the racial identity of the superhero in line with the writer once again. Captain America obviously is the Falcon Cap series. Tochi Onyebuchi is a black writer. Giant Size X-Men Thunderbird, Native American character. Nyla Rose is a Native American. Spider-Man 2099 doesn't really have an affiliation with Steve Orlando, but Spider-Punk is a black character. Cody Ziegler's black. Silk is a Korean character. Emily Kim appears to be a Korean American. Dr. Aphra, Asian character. Alyssa Wong, Asian. Nubia Coronation Special, black character. Vita Ayala, Stephanie Williams, black writers. Iron Fist, Asian character. Alyssa Wong, Asian writer. Shang-Chi, Jean Yang, both Asian. I Am Batman, the Black Batman, black comic book writer. Blood Syndicate, a mostly black team. Jeff Thorne, black writer. Monkey Prince, Asian character. Jean Yang, once again, Asian. Hardware, black character. Brandon Thomas, black writer. Brian Michael Bendis, obviously, he created Naomi. Black Panther, black character. Tochi Onyebuchi, black writer. Aquaman, Jackson Hyde, black. Brandon Thomas, black. So you can see DC and Marvel are kind of doing the exact same thing where they're casting the writers based on their race to go along with the characters. And obviously that doesn't have to be a bad idea, but I think in their minds, you can't get authentic black heroes without black writers, or you can't get authentic Asian heroes without Asian writers. And don't even get me started on Latino heroes. We don't really have any other than Miles Morales, although he had a skip month, so he wasn't really on the list. But DC and Marvel are doing their female and minority-led series a great disservice by limiting the pool of available creators they would even potentially put on the series. I personally think that Jean Yang is a good writer, but obviously, judging by the numbers, the comic book buying audience doesn't buy into it. They don't think that he's writing good, compelling comic book stories at this moment. Tochi Onyebuchi was given an opportunity with that Black Panther Legends series. It wasn't very well written. You can see that the sales are absolutely terrible. So they gifted him an opportunity to write one of the Captain America series. You wouldn't expect a Captain America #1 to come in at number 15, quite frankly. You would expect that to be a top 5 seller in the month, but it didn't have a chance really to play out that way because fans don't know who Tochi Onyebuchi is, and if they do, it's from that Black Panther Legends series, and it just wasn't very good. So they need to refocus on these characters and find the writers with the best ideas, regardless of gender, regardless of race. Just find the people with the best ability to write stories with these characters. Jean Yang has a very good take on Superman. He shouldn't be limited to just Asian superheroes. Obviously, Christopher Priest had issues when he was at Marvel and DC where he was getting pigeonholed where they only wanted to write black characters. The only reason he came back to DC Comics was because they pitched him Deathstroke, and he wanted to expand his horizons. Obviously, he's over at Vampirella now. He can do cool stuff. You need to give people the opportunities and the heroes that best suit their strengths as comic book writers. And I think DC and Marvel are really hamstringing these characters and making them less important than they really should be by, quite frankly, casting the creators to match like the racial or gender identity of the superheroes themselves, but also by passing mantles on to these characters and not thinking that they can stand on their own as their own superheroes. If John Ridley and DC Comics really wanted to get Jace Fox over as a new generation of Bat-related superhero, he needed to not be called Batman. It's just, at this point, it's like a death sentence for the character, and it's a reason for people to tune out because they know which Batman they like. and they don't want a new Batman at this point. There have been some successes over on the Spider-Man line, but those are few and far between for the most part, and they could and should do a much better job with these characters, in my opinion. But the way that DC and Marvel are handling their female and minority-led series just isn't working with readers, and you can see it kind of in the sales data. I'm sure you noticed we did mention Alyssa Wong a couple of times in this video. There's a reason she's on Dr. Aphra, and it's not because Dr. Aphra sells really well, even though it probably should. I believe it's the second lowest selling Star Wars series out there, but she's not really there to sell Star Wars. She's there to queer up Star Wars. Alyssa Wong actually had this interview. I definitely take some of the quotes, talk about what she has to say about the characters that she works with and some of the agendas that she has that just aren't working well with readers.